We begin today at the Mishnah on Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Marchikin es hasulam min hashoivech. You have to distance a ladder that you have that you use by a wall that's near your neighbor's dovkot. Arba amas, 4 amas away from there. What's the reason? Kedei shalei tikboitz hanemiya, so that a nemiya should not jump up. What's this nemiya? The translation I saw is a mongoose. Is that what they have there? They have a different. They just say nemiya. They translate it. No, they don't give a translation? Okay, that's a translation I saw. So this nemiya should not jump up on the ladder to attack the birds that are inside their nest. You also have to distance your wall from your neighbor's house, and he has a gutter that he has to sometimes take care of and fix and clean. So you have to move away your wall 4 amas to give him space to be able to put up his ladder over there, to be able to clean his gutter. Okay, now Taisus' pshat over here regarding this is that even though he would have to put his ladder into your property to be able to climb up to his gutter, how does he have the rights to put up his ladder into your property? The answer is because you sold him those rights. When you gave him those rights to be able to clean his gutter, so the Mishnah here is telling you the share for that. That you sold him those rights. How much does that, what amount of space does that consist of? 4 amas. That's Taisus' pshat. Other Yishayim say that even without selling him those rights, it's an agreement, it's an understanding. This is the halacha of shchenim, that if I have a house with a gutter, the only way that I can clean it out is by being able to put my ladder positioned even into your property, and therefore I'm allowed to do that even without buying those rights. Shall we say that this Mishnah here does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, the Mishnah that says that you shouldn't put a ladder near your friend's dovkot in order that an animal shouldn't climb up to attack the birds? So this is not like Rabbi Yossi. Why? Because the Rabbi Yossi, if we would be following what Rabbi Yossi said, Ha'amar, Rabbi Yossi says later in the Mishnah in this Pedic that when you have one person that has a pit in his property and another person wants to plant a tree near it, the one with the pit is digging in his property, and the one that's planting the tree can plant in his property, even though eventually the roots of his tree are going to extend to the walls of his pit and they can ruin it, but it doesn't matter. This is Rabbi Yossi's opinion that we had mentioned at the beginning of this Pedic, that says that the rule in such a case is ala nizik that the one that's getting damaged is going to have to distance himself. I'm planting the tree in my property. The fact that later on the roots spread out and damage other person's pit, it's not my responsibility to move away. So over here in our Mishnah, if you're putting up this ladder, and I'm putting up a ladder on the wall that's in my property, and then this nemiya comes along and can jump up and go and damage your bird and do a hezek to your birds. So then move away your nest from near the border. You're the one that should move away. I don't have to be the one moving away. That's Rabbi Yossi's opinion. So the Gemara says, not Rashi here actually points out, before we see the Gemara's answer, an important point, a very, very fundamental thing. Rashi here says, all of a sudden the Gemara remembers to bring this opinion of Rabbi Yossi and asks that this Mishnah should not be according to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara could have asked a similar question regarding the Mishnayos before this Pedic that already talks about this idea that, we always said until here that the mazik is the one that has to move away. For example, the previous Mishnah that talks about you have one person that has a wall and you want to put up another wall near his wall, and because of that, now you won't be able to walk in between, and the foundation of your friend's wall will become weakened. So why doesn't the Gemara ask this question earlier? So Rashi's opinion is, and Chanami, the Gemara could have said this earlier. It's an Elamai. Earlier, it's taka the case. All the Mishnayos before do not follow Rabbi Yossi. Here, the Gemara is asking it because, as we'll see, the Gemara is going to answer that this Mishnah could go according to Rabbi Yossi. But MS, the Gemara could have said already the same point regarding the Mishnayos before. That's Rashi's pshat. But other Yishayim, though, Taisvis brings here, they disagree and they say that no, that it's tafka over here, this Mishnah that the Gemara says, Lein Masdisin the Lake Rabbi Yossi, but the Mishnayos before does follow Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Okay, let's see how the Gemara answers this. So the Gemara says, I can tell you that the Mishnah here does follow Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Rav Ashi said, when we were Rav Kahana, Hava Omar, so he said that Maida Rabbi Yossi begiri didei. Rabbi Yossi is Maida, that even though it's usually the one that gets damaged, the nizik that has to distance himself, but if you're standing and throwing arrows and you're being mazik your friend with your very own body, with the action that you're doing, in such a case, the mazik has to distance himself. That's Rabbi Yossi's opinion. So now how does that apply back over here? You're just putting up a ladder, and then there's an animal that jumps up on it. Hachanami, here as well. Zimnin. Sometimes what happens is the bahadi, the monachle, that as you're putting down your ladder on your wall near your friend's dovkot, what happens is yasva b'chor v'kofza. The animal, this nemiya, this mangus, jumps up on the ladder and goes up to the bird. So as you're putting down the ladder, this is happening. So therefore it's mamish like you are throwing an arrow and you're damaging the other person with your body by placing down the ladder for this animal that's standing there and goes right up that ladder. That's where this mission could go according to Rabbi Yossi. Okay, so now the way I explained the Indian of Giri Didei is Rashi's pshat. Rashi says Giri Didei means just like an arrow, that you're literally throwing the arrow with your own body. Over here as well, Giri Didei means that the hezek is happening by something that you're doing with your own physical body right now. That's the pshat of Giri Didei. And that's why Rashi holds that the Mishnayos before definitely can't go according to Rabbi Yossi. Because in the Mishnayos before, it's not a kind of damage that you're doing with your own physical body. Mashenke and other Rishonim hold that the pshat of Giri Didei does not mean only a hezek that you do with your own body, like when you throw an arrow. Giri Didei means anything that when you do something in your property, it begins a damage to your friend, even if it doesn't mamish complete the damage. But as soon as you're doing it, it begins causing a damage to your friend. For example, one of what we had in the first Mishnah, when you put down things that produce heat at the border of your property near your friend's wall. So right when you put down that thing that produces heat, it starts producing that heat that will cause the damage to your friend's wall. According to Taisvis, Rabbi Yossi would hold that's also in the category of Giri Didei because you're doing something that immediately starts to cause a damage. But according to Rashi, it's not Giri Didei because there isn't something you can say that I physically am causing now a damage immediately with the action that I just did. That's here a fundamental machlokes between Rashi and other Rishonim regarding this opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Okay, but the Gemara still asks on this, for gramahu, true that right, you could say that it's possible that right when you put down the ladder, that animal jumps up there on the ladder, but it's still a grama. You're not the one that's actually damaging his birds. It's that animal afterwards that goes up and damages these birds. So if it's a grama, so the Gemara's question is that it should be totally allowed. The Gemara now understands that we have the klal that grama bin izakim, when you do something that then causes a damage to your friend. So even though here it's an action that you're doing that right away the animal is damaging, but nevertheless it's still a grama. The animal is doing it, so the halach is grama bin izakin is potter, and the Gemara understands that if it's potter, then you should be totally mutter. So the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Tuvi bar Masne, Zoisai Meres, what we can learn from here is grama bin izakin aser. That even though grama, when you do something that causes then a damage, you don't have to pay, but it's still going to be aser though to do this. So that's why that's what the Mishnah is saying over here, that in this case, it's a grama, but it's aser. And according to Rav Yossi, this is giri didei, because the animal could jump up there right away. So it's a hezek that's happening immediately with your action that you're doing. And therefore, it's aser even according to Rav Yossi. So the Gemara, Rav Yosef, Havalehana Toli. Rav Yosef had palm trees. Now what happened is the Havasi Ummi, these Ummi would come, the people that are bloodletters, and the Yasvi Tusayu, and they would sit under these palm trees. They weren't sitting, Taisva says, in Rav Yosef's property. They were sitting in a field right under the shade of these palm trees in their property, but they're sitting under these palm trees, and they're doing their work there. They would do their work of bloodletting there under his trees. As a result, so ravens came and they would be attracted to the blood that was there. And then Visalki Abeit Tali, they would go up then to eat from the dates from the tree. And they would ruin they would eat up the dates from Rav Yosef's palm tree. So Rav Yosef tells them, take away from me the korker from here. The korker is the sound that these birds make. Take away these birds from here. So in other words, he's demanding from them not to do their work of bloodletting here under the shade of his trees, and because then they cause this damage to him. That's similar to what we just learned over here in the Mishnah, that you're placing the ladder near someone else's dovecot, and because of this, animals crawl up and they eat up the birds. The same thing over here. You're attracting these ravens here, and it's in a case where as soon as they're leaving the blood there, the ravens come right away and they go up and they eat the dates. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye said, but they're not eating up his dates. They're attracting the ravens here that go and eat up the dates, and this is a grama, and a grama is potter. Amalei, so Rav Yosef said, that we learn from our Mishnah, grama b'nizakin aser, that even though it's only a grama and you potter, but it's still aser for you to cause this, to sit there and cause this damage. And therefore, they have to leave from here. Don't they have a chazakeh? They were sitting already over there for a while, and they have a chazakeh to be able to have the rights to do this in this place. All right, so over here there's a machlokes rishonim what exactly this chazakah is. Whether this chazakah is just the fact that they were there for a while, they automatically get a chazakah that you're meichel and they can be there without them having any taina, any basis to why they're there. Just the fact that we were here for a while. Or then Taisa says that no, it must be that the concept of chazakah is that they were there for 3 years, right? So the concept of chazakah is because you sold them the rights. They're claiming that you sold them the rights. So therefore they have a chazakah to be there under your tree. So, no, it's an Rishus Yachid, but they are not on his property. They're on their property under your trees, right? And they're causing you this damage, and they're not allowed to be there to cause you this damage, because the grama of the damage is still aser. But the Gemara asks, even though to be guiding this damage is aser, but once they're there for long enough, for 3 years, so now they have a chazakah to be there, whether because they claim that they bought this rights from you, or even if not. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, ein chazakeh l'nizakin. You cannot establish a chazakeh when you're there in a place even for 3 years and you're causing damage. Right? So again, here Tosfos has two pirushim in this. Whether this means even if you bought those rights, Tosfos brings Rabbeinu Tam says even if you bought those rights from your friend, it doesn't matter because your friend could say, "I thought I can handle this, but it's a damage, and I thought I can sell you the rights to be near me, even though it causes me damage, but it's now I realize it's too much for me to handle." Or then Tosfos says, no, it's only if you didn't buy the rights. The Gemara is answering that they didn't buy the rights, and only without buying the rights, just to be there a while, 3 years, you can't establish a chazakah that you can then remain there and cause damage to your friend. But that doesn't apply to every kind of damage. Didn't we learn about this halacha that Rav Mari Omar bekutre? Rav Mari said, what kind of damage do you say that you can't establish a chazakah that you're there? That's kutre. If the smoke is the kind of damage that a person can say that I thought I could handle it, but now I realize I can't. Or if there's a beis hakisei, the way it was in those times, an outhouse which is exposed and it's open and there's a very bad smell, that's something that a person could say that he can't handle. But over here, we're talking about these bloodletters that left blood there and they caused damage to his dates. This is not something that a person can say later after he was meichel already or after he sold these rights that he can't handle it. Amalei, so Rav Yosef said, Hani, lididi, these bloodletters that are here for me, da'anine da'toy, I'm very finicky, ki kutre o beis hakisei damali. For me, it's like smoke or like a beis hakisei that I can't handle it. Right? So Tosfos here explains, even though the original problem that he had was that they're eating up his dates, but it was also the blood that was bothering him, and not only that, the issue that he had with the dates was that these birds they would get their mouth into the blood, and then they would go up to the dates, even if they weren't eating the dates, but they would make the dates dirty with all the blood, and therefore he says, I'm finicky and I can't eat these dates anymore, and therefore he's demanding of them to move away.
That's even a bigger hazard than Osher, Niske Beis Hakisei.
Right, no.
Is the smell, no?
No, Anachanami, no, but still, no.
Anachanami,
no, but the Svar is the opposite. When it comes to a kind of hazard where, let's say, they eat your dates. So you know what they do? They eat your dates. So you thought you're going to have 100 dates, instead you'll have 50 dates. And you sold that right. You're making money. You're going to lose dates, but you sold the rights. But when it's something of a smell, a smoke, that's something that it's hard for a person to be mishaya, whether he can handle this kind of environment, to live in smoke or smell. That's over there, Dafka there, says that you can't be meichel. Unless you're like Rav Yosef, which is Anina Datoi. You have to distance, if you have dovecots, so you have your doves, you have to distance it from a city, 50 yamas. The reason is because otherwise these birds come and they eat up the seeds and the vegetables and things in a person's garden. And also, because of this, a person should not have his dovecot in his own property if he's inside a city, around other fields or gardens, unless there's a distance of 50 amas to each side of where the dovecot is. Rabbi Yehuda says the distance has to be much more than this. Beis arbas kurin maloi shegar ayina. the space, the distance of 4 kor is how far a yaina goes, how far a dove flies. Okay, so now that's a much bigger shear. If I remember correctly, the Rambam here says that the shear of Beis Arbar's Koren, it means on each side it has to be 4 Koren, and that's much more than 50 Amos. I think it's 270 something, 273 Amos on each side that it has to be in the dovecot in your property, that it shouldn't fly and go to other fields and gardens to damage them. Now, if he bought this property, he bought a property that has these dovecots in it, and the seller already had them there. Then even if he bought a tiny property that has a quarter of a kor and it has these dovecots in it, he establishes that chazakeh, that just like the sellers had it in their property, so the sellers must have made some deal with the people around. He must have bought the rights to have these dovecots here. So now if you're buying it from that buyer, so then you don't have to come and prove anything that you have the rights. You just you say that I bought it from him and he had it here already for 3 years this way, and then Bezin will taina that you have the right to keep it in your property, as the Gemara will explain. Okay, so now the Gemara here will focus first on the shear of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that the issue with the birds, that they can go and fly and eat up other people's produce, is 50 amas. In fact, the Gemara, it's only 50 amas that they can fly, and not more than this. I'll ask you from what it says in another Mishnah, you're not allowed to spread out nets to trap and catch birds. You have to distance these traps 30 ris. Now each ris is 4 mil, and each mil is 2,000 amas. So this is much more than 50 amas that our Mishnah said. You have to distance it 30 ris from the city, because otherwise you'll be trapping and catching the birds of people in the city. So you see, it's much more. The birds fly much further than 50 amas. And says the Gemara, Amar Abaye. So Abaye says, Meishet Shaiti Tuve. The birds can definitely fly much more than 50 amas. But the karsayu b'chamishim am samalia. But they fill their stomachs with the seeds or things that they eat already by 50 amas. So therefore, only 50 amas is the space that you have to distance if your friend has a garden. So you shouldn't come to eat from his garden. But if the issue is that you shouldn't come to trap the birds from the people of the city, that's much more. That's 30 dis. In fact, the Gemara, but now the Gemara asks regarding this shear of not trapping the birds of the people of the city. The bird flies 30 ris and not further than this. Vatanya, but another brayso we learned will be Yishov mil, that if you're putting out nets to catch birds, and there's a Yishuv here, there's people that live and have their own private birds, you have to distance 100 mil from the city, not 30 ris, which is 4 mil. So it's much greater distance than this. So the Gemara answers, Rav Yosef says, B'yishuv kromim, that what it's talking about over here is that there's a yishuv that has a lot of vineyards that there are outside the city that go along the way, and the bird is able to fly from one vineyard to another. And when it has places to land on these vineyards, so the bird can fly even 100 mil. It's in that case where you have to distance your nets to catch birds 100 mil. But if you don't have all those vineyards along the way, so then it's only 30 ris outside the city, which is only 4 mil. Rav answers, Rabba Omar, the Yishuv Shevchin, that this is a place that outside the city there are other dovecots along the way, that the bird will then be able to fly a further distance and land in these dovecots and then continue flying. And then you say that you have to distance your nets much further, 100 mil. In fact, the Gemara, according to this answer of Rabbe, you're telling me that there's additional dovecots outside the city along the way, and that's where the bird flies further, just because of these other dovecots that belong to people. You have to distance your net further. It's not that 100 mil or 100 mil from the city. It's even from these dovecots now. So the Gemara says three possibilities. These other dovecots that are outside the city belong to this person that's putting out these nets here. So if for these dovecots he doesn't have to distance, it's its own. It belongs to him. It's now, but LMI, what we're saying is that other birds from other people of the city can fly and land in these areas, and therefore you're going to have to distance further. Or Vibay Seimed, the Kanani, or these other dovecots belong to Goyim, and therefore you have no responsibility not to put out any nets to catch their birds. One of the Rishonim here say that this whole thing of not, even though Gezel Akum is Asa, but this whole thing of not putting out a net to catch birds, you might catch birds from other people, is not really Isam and Atayra. It's a Takanas Chachamim because of Darkei Shalom. So this doesn't apply by a Kanani, by a Goy. Another possibility is the hefker. There are other dovkots, but it's that they're all hefker, and therefore mitzad that you wouldn't have to distance. Going back to the Mishnah, Rabbi Yudaim based Arbes Kurim v'chulu. The Gemara is going to focus on the v'chulu, where the Mishnah said that if you bought a property that has dovkots in it, and there's no space around it, a very small property, you don't have to now make this space that the Mishnah said before, whether 50 yamis or the share according to Rabbi Yehuda, because if you bought it from the seller with that condition, so then the Bezdin will taina for the lekeach that the seller had it in that kind of circumstance. He probably had got the mechila of people around him, and therefore you buy those rights from the seller as well. So Rav Papa v'teimer Rav Zvid. What's the pshat on the Mishnah? And what do we see from our Mishnah? The din of them. Our Mishnah is teaching us that tayanin l'lekeach v'tayanin l'yirish. That Bezin will come and argue on behalf of a buyer, and Bezin will come and argue on behalf of an inheritor. Now, so Rashi brings Barichas, what this halacha is, usually if you're in a property and you claim that you have ownership in this property, you're going to have to prove it. You have to have a chazaka of 3 years, and you have to have a proper taina, meaning you can't just say, I'm here for 3 years and it's mine. You have to have a proper taina to say that I'm here 3 years because I bought it from so-and-so. If you just say, I'm here 3 years, you don't have any taina, any basis, any argument to explain why it's yours, then you have no chazaka. But by a buyer or by an inheritor, he doesn't have to have any taina. If he can come and prove that the person he bought it from was there for 3 years, or his father that he's inheriting this from was there for 3 years, so then you don't now have to come and explain who your father bought it from, or who the person you bought it from, where did he buy it from. Bezdin will come and taina for you and say that the buyer got it legitimately from the buyer bought it from the one that's now arguing and saying that it belongs to him. The buyer legitimately bought it, or the father legitimately bought it. Bezdin will taina for the lekeach and the yirish. And the reason is because the lekeach and the yirish don't have the ability to go and know the history that happened from before. Rashi says, Psach picha, we open his mouth, we have to taina for him, because otherwise anybody can come and take advantage from this buyer that doesn't know the history before, and will come and taina, you bought it from him, it never belonged to him. So this is, Bezin will taina for a buyer. So that's the point that we see here from our Mishnah, that you bought this property with this dovkots in it that doesn't have any distance around it the way it usually should have. So Bezdin will taina that the person that you bought it from, that had it, you can verify that the seller had it in the same condition, that he probably worked it out with the people around him. That's what Bezdin will taina for you. So the Gemara asks on this, Yairish Tanina, the fact that Bezdin tainas for a Yairish, that's something that we learned already clearly in a Mishnah here. Later in the Masechta, the Mishnah says, Haba Mishum Yerusha, a person that's occupying a property, he has a chazaka of 3 years, and his taina is that I yarshin it from my father. Ain't it tzarich taina? He doesn't have to come and give a taina exactly how his father bought it. And this, so if so, why do we have to have our Mishnah over here regarding this lekeach, a buyer that Bezin will taina for him? We see this halacha by a Yairish. So the Gemara says, the lekeach itzrichale. Our Mishnah is telling us this halacha regarding a buyer. In fact, the Gemara lekeach nami tanine, regarding a lekeach, it also says already in the Mishnah. It says there, lekeach chotze, person that buys in a courtyard. Uba zizin uguzustrais, he has protrusions from this courtyard, whether ledges or a porch that's hanging over into the Rishus Harabim, and it's taking away from the people of walking in the Rishus Harabim. But he bought it in that condition. That he has that chazakah, and Bezdin will argue for him that if he bought it this way, that probably the seller worked it out with the people of the Rishus Harabim, and they were meichel to allow him to do this. So we see already this exact point in another Mishnah that Bezdin will taina for the lekeach. And says the Gemara, tzriche, the halacha that it says in our Mishnah is still necessary. There's 2 different possibilities regarding a lekeach. The Yashmin and Hassam, if we would only say that Mishnah later in the Masechta regarding a porch, for example, that's hanging over into the Rishus Harabim, I would say that over there, Gabi Rishus Harabim, when you have a porch hanging over to the Rishus Harabim, over there, Bezdin will taina for the buyer. Because the Eimer, Kainis L'Teich Shaloyu, it's logical to say that probably what happened is he's not taking away from the place of the street, from people to walk there. Probably what happened is that he built his house further into his property. And then he built a porch. So his porch is not really hanging over into the Rishus Harabim. The street spread into his private property. He really built his house further in. Or inami achuli achol b'nei Rishus Harabim gabei. Even if he didn't do that, the fact that he's built his porch over the Rishus Harabim, it must be that he got permission from the Rabbim. because the people of the Rabbim would not just be Meichel this, to take away the street, the people to be able to go through. It must be that he got the permission from the people of the city. Taisus over here brings, you have the Zayin Tuvei Ha'ir, you have the people of the city that manages and take care. He must have gotten permission for this. So maybe in such a case, Bezdin, there's a good basis why Bezdin should come and argue on behalf of the buyer. But over here in our Mishnah, I would say that this doesn't apply. In our Mishnah, so the Rishonim say that we can say that this halacha of the end of the Mishnah is going on the second case of the Mishnah where it says, it's not going on the first case of the Mishnah. It's talking about one individual and he has a neighbor that has a garden, and you have your bird that can go and eat up his produce of his garden. So it's between one individual and another. Over here, you don't have strong enough of a reason to believe that the seller, they were Meichel. This other neighbor was Meichel to the seller. So therefore, maybe Bezdin won't argue on behalf of the Lekeach. But on the other hand, though, there's also a svara to say the opposite. V'yashmin and hacha, if we would say only our mission here, where it's your dovkot near your neighbor's garden, I would say hacha the kivin the yachidu, because what you're doing is only going to affect one individual. So maybe I should say over here, it's easier for you to appease one individual and to get his agreement to allow you to have dovzir. So it's over here that the Bezin will argue on behalf of the Lekeach that probably the meicher, the seller, got this agreement. Or whether you appeased him with money, or he was meichel you. Avl Rabim, when it comes to the Mishnah later that talks about building a porch over a street, man pious or man shavik, who's it's much harder. How are you going to get them to be appeased? Who are you going to pay off for this? Who's going to allow you to do this? You have to get, as Taisa says again, the shiva tuvi ear. It's something which over there I could say maybe it's much more difficult. Same alloy over there, maybe Bezin would not argue on your behalf. So tzriche, therefore it says in both of these cases of a lekeach that Bezin will argue on your behalf. The Mishnah said that that if you have your doves here in this place and you bought it from someone that had it in this position without the proper distancing, so you already have a chazakah, even though it damages the neighbor's properties. So you have a chazakah for this. You could never establish a chazakah for nizakin, and according to some Rishonim, that's even if you bought these rights, you still can't establish a chazakah. So here's where the answer was given, the point that we already learned before. Rav Mari Amar B'Kutre. Rav Mari says that you can't establish a chazakah when you're causing damage. That's only if there's a smoke, because then the person could say, I didn't realize, I thought I could handle it, but I can't. And Rav Zvid Amar B'Beis HaKisei, or by the bad smell of a Beis HaKisei, only then is there no chazakah. You find a nefel, which is a chick. You find a chick outside going around somewhere, and it's within 50 amis of a shevich, of a dovkot. So now we know that it belongs to there. Hareu shel baal ha-shevich. We know that it came from that shevich. If it's chutz mechamisha mama, if you find this nefel outside of 50 amis, then hareu shel meitzai. So this is a chick that has no siman, and it's not close enough to any shevich. So if it has no siman, you don't know where it came from. It dropped from somebody else, and so therefore you can keep it. If you find it between two dovkots, so karev lezeh shaloi. If it's closer to one, it belongs to him. Karev lezeh, it's closer to the other. Shaloi, it belongs to the other one. Mechzal mechzeh, if it's right in the middle, equal distance to both of them, so then shneim yachleiku. So they have to divide the value of this bird that was found because it's a suffix. So you divide it between them. Okay, so the Gemara here begins a fundamental the discussion regarding determining what something belongs to, where something comes from. So Amar Rab Chanina said, Roiv v'karev. If you have two opposing things to look at, how to determine where something comes from. Either you can determine according to Roiv, following the majority, or you can follow karev. What is it closer to? Hoilchin acha haroiv. You follow the majority, the din of following the majority is stronger than following the distance when something is closer. The halacha that you follow Raiv is learned from a pasuk. It's learned from Achir Rab Lahatais. You follow Raiv. And Korve Dairaisa, the halacha of Karev is also learned from a pasuk in the Torah, and this is learned by Egla Rufa when you find a dead body, and you have to go according to the closest city. That's where the Egla Rufa is done. And you don't follow, you follow the closest city. So still, afilahachi ruba adif. Raiv is stronger than karev. That's what we see here from, this is the halacha that Rab Chanina said. Okay. Raiv is majority. You always follow the majority, you don't follow Karev. In a case where you have these two opposing things, you always follow Raiv, it's stronger. Some Rishonim say that it's Raiv is actually a stronger raya. Raiv is logically a stronger raya than Karev. Most of Rab Zeire asks on this, but let's look at the source of what it says by Egla Arufa. That's the source for Karev. So the pasuk says, the city that's closest to this dead body that's found, and there's the mitzvah of Egla Rufa. So the Egla Rufa has to be done with that city. That's the whole halacha of Egla Rufa, that you measure which city is it closest to. Now, what does that mean? Even though there's another city that is not as close, and that other city could be even a larger city, and there's more people there, but still you go according to the city that's close. So you clearly see that you follow what's Karev, and you don't follow Raiv. So how does Rab Chanina say that we follow Raiv? And says the Gemara B'Deleka, there is no other city in the area that's actually larger than this city. If there's another city there, it's the same size, the same amount of people as this city. So in such a case, there is no Raiv. So that's why the pasuk is telling you that you follow what's Karev. But even if there is no other one city that's larger than this city, but why don't you just follow Raiv of the entire world? You have one city that it's closest to, and so that's the Karev. And then besides that, you have the entire world that there are many more people that this dead body could have come from, that someone from the rest of the world could have killed him. So you should follow Raiv, and the Karev to this city should not be stronger than the Raiv of the entire world. Answers the Gemara, but Yesheves Bein Aharim. The pasuk is talking about a case that it's a city, one city that it's closest to, that's between mountains, and therefore you can't say that you should follow Raiv from the rest of the world, because the Raiv of the rest of the world, people of the rest of the world don't usually come here to this area between these mountains, so therefore all you have is Karev. But if there would take to be Raiv, then you would follow what it says in the other pasuk. Achiram lahatais. Achiram lahatais is stronger than Karev. So the Gemara is not stop making an ikimte. The point of here is there's a pasuk of Achiram lahatais, and Rab Chanina is saying that it's logical that Achiram lahatais is the stronger koyach. It logically proves more than Karev. So it must be that the pasuk by Egla Rufa where it says Karev is not a stida to that, because it's talking specifically about a case where it's between mountains. Tanan. Now, what did it say in our Mishnah? You find this chick within 50 yamas of one dovkot, so then it belongs to the owner of that shevich. So what does that mean? Even if there are other shevchim, there are other dovkots that are around in that area, they're just not as close, but they have much more birds. There's much more than the dovkot. And says the Gemara B'Deleka, like we said before, the din of our Mishnah is that there are no others there in the area that are more than what this one has. In fact, the Gemara here could have right away asked the same question as we asked before, that you should still go Basaruba da Alma, even if there is no one dovkot that has more birds than this one. It could have asked that question, but instead, the Gemara asks a question from the Seif of the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah continue and say? If you find this chick and it's outside of 50 amas in the distance of a dovkot, then arel shel moitzei. So then you can keep it. Then I say that it didn't come from this dovkot, and then you can keep it. But the question is, why do we say that? V'i b'deleke, if there is no other dovkot in the area, like you just said, then vadai mahu nafal. So then definitely it fell from this one. If it's true, it's a distance, it's more than 50 amas from this dovkot here, but there is no other one though that you can say that it fell from over here from this area. So why should you say that you should be able to take it and keep it for yourself? It came from somewhere, so it probably came from this one that even though it's more than 50 amas away from it. Answers the Gemara, what we're talking about in our Mishnah is b'medada, that this bird that we see here can't fly. It's medada. It's just hopping around. So we know that when it hops around, it can't hop around more than 50 yamas. A bird that can't fly, it's a little chick that's hopping around. It can't hop around more than 50 yamas. So if you find this bird that is within 50 yamas, you know it came from this shevich. That's how far it can go. And therefore over there, we follow what's karev. But and there's no other ones around it that it could come from. But then in the Seif of the Mishnah, when it said that it was further than 50 amas, So over here, in such a case, it couldn't have come from this dovecot because it's more than 50 yamas.
So where did it come from?
So in such a case, you say that it must have. So then it's not. If you see that it went more than 50 yamas, it must have flown. It must have the kayak to fly, right? So when you see it within 50 yamas and you see this little chick being medadeh, so then you look at it and you see the way it is as a medadeh, you assume that it probably could only hop around and it came from the one that's within 50 yamas. But when you see that it's more than 50 yamas, so then you say, it must have been able to fly, even though it's a little chick, but it must have been able to fly, and then it could have come from anywhere. And then you follow the roiv of the world, and then you say it could come from anywhere, and therefore you can keep it because it can come from anywhere, and there's no simon to it, so you can keep it. That's how Rashi explains this Gemara. Okay, now the Gemara interjects here first with an ibaya regarding this shear of 50 yamas, and you said regarding the medadeh that it can't, if it's happening, it can't go more than 50 yamas. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked about this. Ragle achas b'toich nuname, v'ragle achas chutz mechamishamame mau. What if you find this dove, this bird, then it's 1 foot within the 50 yamas and 1 foot out of the 50 yamas? So what do you say then? Do you say that it belongs to this? Does it belong to this dovecot because it's still 1 foot inside, or if it's 1 foot outside? So then we say that it does not belong to that dovecot. And the Gemara says regarding this shaila that Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, Valdo, because of this shaila he asked, Afkul Rabbi Yirmiyah mibei midrasha. They expelled him from the Beis Medrash because Rashi's pshat is he was asking these kinds of shailas that he's matriach them with such kind of shailas which is not common, it's not practical, it's not common to happen. 1 foot inside, 1 foot outside. Taisa says a little different, that they took him out of the Beis Medrash because if it's 1 foot outside, then there's no question. The shear is 50 yamas. If it's just 1 foot outside, so it's outside 50 yamas. When Chachamim give a shear, the shear is exact. You can't start asking 1 foot in, 1 foot out. 1 foot out is 1 foot out. So that's why they took him out. It's not even a shayla b'chal. That's why they took him out of the Beis Medrash. Okay, let's see one more Toshima here that the Gemara.
Even back then, or quickly for problems?
Yeah, the Gemara asks a shayla on Rab Chanina's halacha. Again, Rab Chanina's halacha is that Raiv and Karev. You follow Raiv, you do not follow Karev. So the Gemara goes to the next halacha of the Mishnah. Toshima, the Mishnah said, Nimtzu ben shnei shayfchais. You find this bird or this chick between 2 shayfchais. Karev lezeh shaloi. If it's closer to one, it belongs to him. The Karev lezeh shaloi. If it's closer to the other, then it belongs to the other. What does that mean? Va'afal gav, it would seem that Mishnah is saying that there's 2 here, and it's saying the only thing that matters is which one it's closer to. Va'afal gav, the chad minayu nafish mechavrei. Seemingly, even if one has more birds than the other, you still follow what's karev and not what's reiv. And says the Gemara, we hear the case is that the 2 dovecots that the Mishnah is talking about actually are the same, and there's no reiv, there's no more birds in one more than the other. So the Gemara asks the same question we asked before, but v'leizel basaru b'dalmeh, why don't we follow the majority of the world? So at this point, the Gemara is thinking that in this case, where it's talking about the bird that's between these 2 shayvches, we're talking about a bird that is far enough, more than 50 yamas between them, that it's not a medadeh. It's not just a bird that's hopping around. It's a bird that can fly. So if it's a bird that can fly, it must be that it can fly, because it's a more further distance than 50 yamas from these 2 dovecots. So then we should still follow the reiv of the entire world. Why are we saying that it belongs to one or the other, or one that's closer to it belongs to? And says the Gemara, the case over here is, no, like we said before, it is actually a medada. It is a bird that just hops around. And even though it's further than 50 yamas from one or the other, it doesn't matter, because it's talking about bishvil shel kromim. It's talking about an area where you have a row of vineyards. So over here, by a row of vineyards, even a bird that's just hopping around, it hops around even more than 50 yamas. But over here I say that it belongs to the one that it's closer to, because the im isa de ma'almasi. And I'm not going to say that it probably came from another place out further away in the world because of these vineyards, that it's able to go a further distance. Because why don't I say that it came from a further place? Because kivin demidadi, because we are talking about a bird that only hops around, a little chick that's just hopping around. Leimotzi osi, he can't come from so far. The chol demidadi v'hada chazi le'lekine medadi, because the nature of these little chicks are, as long as it can hop, and it could turn back and still see in its distance. It can see where it came from. It could see the nest that it came from. Medadi. It continues hopping around. But v'loi loy medadi. But if not, it won't continue hopping. And so Rashi says that's part of what the Gemara is trying to say when it says that there's a shvil shel kromim, that you have this row of vineyards, and because I have these vineyards, it blocks the view of this little bird. So therefore, we're not going to say that it came from a further place in the world because it's going to be blocked with the view of these vineyards. It's not going to hop around from a further place. And therefore, I say it came from these vineyards here. Sorry, it came from these dovecots that are near it, and therefore I follow what's karev. That's the pshat in Gemara there. So pashut. Okay.